What if I told you that the most dangerous man in Hollywood right now isn't a rapper, isn't a mogul, and isn't a politician? He's a comedian. 5 feet 4 inches tall, rocking a perm, saying the same things for 20 years, while the industry laughed at him, dismissed him, and worked overtime to make sure nobody took him seriously. And then, on one January night in 2024, he sat down in front of a microphone, and everything changed. That man is Katt Williams, and what he did on January 3, 2024 wasn't just an interview. It was a detonation. To really understand why that night mattered, you have to understand who Katt Williams actually is. Not the version the media has spent 2 decades trying to bury, but the real one. If you've ever watched Pimp Chronicles, it's Pimpin' or Katt Pacalypse, you already know. This man can hold a crowd in the palm of his hand for hours. He is precise. He remembers everything. And he doesn't stumble into a point. He builds toward it, brick by brick, until the wall is so high you can't see around it. That's the Katt Williams that Hollywood needed you to forget. Because a man like that, with a microphone and nothing left to lose, is the most dangerous thing in any room. On that January night, he sat down with Shannon Sharpe on the Club Shay Shay podcast. What followed was nearly 3 hours of controlled demolition. The interview eventually hit 83 million views on YouTube and kept climbing. Shannon Sharpe, a man who knows these same people, who has had them on his show, who has relationships with them, mostly sat back and let it ride. He didn't push back. He didn't redirect. He let Katt talk. That silence from Shannon said everything that words couldn't. Katt called out a lot of names that night. But one name triggered a very specific kind of reaction. Not the loudest reaction, that probably belonged to Kevin Hart, but the most calculated one. Steve Harvey. What Katt said about Harvey wasn't just personal. It was surgical. He accused Harvey of stealing his homeless narrative, the sleeping in his car story that has been the foundation of the entire Steve Harvey brand for decades. That story has been told in interviews, in books, on his talk show, in motivational speeches to millions of people. It is the bedrock of who Steve Harvey says he is. And Katt Williams, with a named witness, comedian Mark Curry, said the whole thing is a lie. That Curry was on the road with Harvey 25 years ago, that Harvey was pulling in $3,000 a show in cash, doing 5 shows a week. That is not a man who was sleeping in his car. That is a man who was comfortable. And comfortable men who build empires on stories of suffering owe the world an explanation. But Katt wasn't done. He also claimed that Harvey's entire pivot away from stand-up comedy, the pivot that launched his television career and eventually made him one of the most recognized faces in American media, wasn't a choice. It was a retreat. According to Katt, Harvey lost a stand-up comedy battle in Detroit in front of 10,000 people to one Katt Williams. And instead of owning that defeat, Harvey built a cleaner story, that he walked away from stand-up voluntarily, that he had bigger opportunities waiting. Katt's version is that Harvey didn't walk away. He ran, and then spent the rest of his career making sure nobody remembered why. On top of all of that, Katt accused Harvey of lifting the concept for the Steve Harvey Show directly from Mark Curry's Hangin' with Mr. Cooper. Stolen origin story, stolen career pivot.
Be watching them and holding them accountable like everybody else. Wouldn't you grade them on a curve? Wouldn't you go, whew, this guy? Because, I mean, what are we reacting to? What are we reacting to? You're the one.
Stolen television concept. 3 separate allegations. 3 named witnesses. Not one of them refuted. Now, how did Steve Harvey respond? First, he went to X and posted a Bible verse, Psalms 23:5, something about his enemies watching God prepare a table for him. Calm, spiritual, positioning himself as the bigger man. That was January 7th. 7 months later, at a live event in Atlanta, the mask slipped. Harvey told the crowd he used to be a fighter, that he could knock Katt's monkey ass out, shoot the perm straight off his head. When the clip went viral, Harvey said he didn't know anyone was upset, claimed he was joking, then offered to apologize. Follow that arc for a second. First he was above it, then he was threatening violence, then he claimed confusion, then he was sorry. That is not the arc of a man shrugging off false accusations. That is the arc of a man who has been sitting with something for months and finally broke under the weight of it. But here's where this story stops being about 2 men who don't like each other and starts being about something much larger. During that same interview, Katt Williams wasn't only talking about comedy beefs. He was talking about the architecture of power in Hollywood. He was talking about what it actually costs to reach the top and what some people allow to happen to themselves or to others to stay there. He referenced Jeffrey Epstein. He talked about hidden cameras, elite networks, and how powerful men protect each other because everyone has leverage on everyone else. And then he said something that the headlines never fully captured. All of these big deviants are catching hell in 2024. It's up for all of them. It don't matter if you Diddy or TD Jakes or whoever you is. That last phrase, or whoever you is, was deliberate. Katt Williams does not stumble into vague language. He was leaving a door open and trusting the audience to walk through it on their own. Here's what makes it hit even harder in retrospect. When the subject of Chris Tucker came up in that same interview, Katt didn't hedge. He said directly, "The Chris Tucker we got now is Epstein Island Chris Tucker." Plain language, named, on the record, because Tucker's name had appeared in the unsealed court documents.
That put him in a position where he thought he was God and could call himself Jesus. And you're the one told a guy that writes musical lyrics that he was a genius. You're the one that's like, so what do you expect? The guy married a whore. Like, what?
Oh, Lord.
Like,
But for Steve Harvey, whose credibility Katt had just spent an hour dismantling, he didn't make that direct connection. He laid the groundwork, then stepped back. With Katt Williams, that kind of restraint is never accidental. It's a choice. And the choice itself is the message. In January 2026, the DOJ released over 3 million pages of Epstein files, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. Attorney General Pam Bondi released a list of 300 notable names, while clarifying that being on the list does not automatically imply wrongdoing in those documents. That needs to be stated clearly. But here's what was also reported. Lawmakers who reviewed unredacted portions said 6 men, some with photographs, had been redacted with no public explanation. Representative Ro Khanna said it plainly. 6 men, photographs, no explanation. Another representative threatened to read those names on the House floor, where he would be protected by the speech and debate clause if the DOJ didn't correct what he called their mistakes. Those names are still protected. Those 6 men are still unknown to the public. Katt Williams told you in January 2024, before any of this was mainstream, before the Epstein Files Transparency Act, before the big release, that this era of exposure was coming. He described in detail how powerful men use shared secrets as mutual insurance. He said all of it was about to come out. And now congressional representatives are describing exactly that structure when they talk about unexplained redactions protecting unnamed men with photographs. Think about what it means to have been saying these things for 20 years. Think about every headline, every arrest, every moment the media used to make Katt Williams look unstable. He has said publicly that those narratives were weaponized, that every time he opened his mouth about certain people, the machine responded by making him look irrational. And now, in 2025, multiple people he named by name, Diddy, TD Jakes, others, have faced consequences that the public never saw coming. Everything he said on January 3, 2024, this was never just a comedy beef. This was a man who spent 20 years being called crazy for saying things that turned out to be true, finally sitting down in front of a microphone with nothing left to lose, and saying all of it out loud with names attached. The question was never whether Katt Williams was angry. The question is whether he was wrong. And every single week that passes, that question gets harder and harder to answer.